Hello, welcome. Today is Thursday, January 23rd. It is not so cold out today, but it's been really cold this week. It's getting finally better. I know some of the parts of the US right now are being covered in snow, which is never been seen for many people. But anyways, thank you for joining us. I have an interesting guest today, Kirk Lubimov. I've actually met him once in person. We have been chatting back and forth on Twitter, exchanging ideas and stuff just in the public and then private message, and I decided to ask him to come on my show because I really like his take. If you've been watching our show, I've been showing a lot of his tweet and sharing it with my viewers because a lot of the times I agree with him, and I think he has a lot of insight into Canadian politics, Canadian economic information, and quite frankly, he knows about a lot of stuff that I don't know about. And that's why I follow him. So I have him coming on my guest. If you're watching this, let me know where you're watching from. Every time you comment and you click like, it actually helps the algorithm so more people can see this show. So let me know where you're watching from. Also, this show is a conversation. So if you're watching and you want to ask Kirk or I a question, or if you want to participate in the discussion, we are open to that. I will highlight your comment. We'll respond to the comments. So we want this more to be a conversation. That's why it's live stream. It's not a pre-recorded thing that you get to just watch. You get to actually participate. With that, my first guest, which I'm going to be bringing up shortly, not my first guest, my guest today. He's the fourth, I think, that I've had so far. His name is Kirk Lubimov. I've introduced him a bit, but I'll give you a bit of his background. So he's a Canadian political commentator and entrepreneur known for his insight into Canadian politics and economics. He focuses on the intersection of policy, economics, and innovation, particularly in long-term views and their impacts on entrepreneurship and investment. So I'm going to bring him on the stage. I asked him, so what exactly do you do? I asked him just before the show, but I think I want him to explain this to the listeners. What do you do for your full-time job?
Yeah,
More than just being a Twitter commentator.
I monetize my Twitter. No,
Yeah.
you actually nailed it in your introduction there. So I do work in the intersection of economics, innovation, and policy. So I work on the capital side, advising of essentially where to invest, what's the best way to invest, how to help grow companies, and the economy overall. And I primarily focus on the longer term impact of innovation and how it changes society and the future essentially.
Yeah, so you work with startups too, right? Help
Yeah.
getting investors kind of involved in that.
hmm
So with everything that's been happening in the last few years, you've been doing this for how long?
Oh, 15 years, a
Okay,
little
so
longer.
so
Yeah,
so
20.
you've probably experienced the Trudeau era, its impact on Canada. There's been so much happening in politics in Canada, in the US. What do you foresee the future economic status of Canada and startup and innovation in Canada in its current state? And what do you think is going to be coming in the future, whatever direction we end up going, if it's a new government or the Liberal government? We're going to talk about that too. Your kind of ideas on that, or concerns about this new leadership race. But right now, what has happened in the last 10 years?
Well, the story of Canada is essentially neglect from the economic side, is essentially neglect and virtual signaling based waste, right? So we haven't really made any policies based on fundamentals needs for the country, based on fundamental economic generation. We made policies based on UN resolutions, different, the Paris Accord, and all those things. that has nothing really to do with what Canada needs from a development point of view.
Mhm.
We just said, okay, we signed this agreement with the world or with someone else. So we need to implement carbon tax and we need to implement this amount of taxes for X, Y, and Z. But we neglect the actual fundamental development in infrastructure. We chased away capex investment, which is a long-term form of investment in projects such as oil and gas, and we moved um, our labor market essentially because of this lack of innovation and fresh ideas. Really, we moved the labor market towards a service industry and farther away from R&D, farther away from actually yielding productivity out of it, and towards low productivity economies such as low skilled labor and a huge public sector growth, which is essentially outpaced uh, the growth of the private sector jobs by at least 4 or 5x.
And there was, I'm gonna see if I can find it while you answer the next question, but there was a graph that showed, if you saw, did you see Pierre Poilievre's like 15-minute explanation of capital gains and its effect on Canada? Did you get a chance to see it yet?
The capital gains effect in Canada?
Yeah,
The,
yeah, he
the new
did.
one?
Yeah, it was a new one, but there was a graph in there that showed basically companies coming and investing in Canada, how it had gone way down, and it compared
Yeah.
it to the US. And it was is such a stark example of what happens when you have poor leadership in a country. Big industry, big companies are less likely to want to settle or invest in that. Have you noticed like it being kind of a harder sell, you being Canadian, or are most of your clients, I guess, or contacts Canadians to begin with?
They're probably half US, but
Okay.
so Canada overall has lost probably over 200 billion, well, easily over $200 billion in investment under the Trudeau government, which is a substantial amount, right, for our economy. It's
Hmm.
essentially 10% of our GDP, plus the ROI that we lost on top of it over the years. So the issue with this capital gains tax, it's just again penalizing people for no particular reason, and it's especially important in the innovation space because um, innovation takes on investors, especially, and people participating in it, take on a lot of risk, right?
Yeah.
Like there is no guaranteed paycheck at the end of the day from within startups, right? It's you essentially giving it all and invest in trying to be smart, trying to pivot, uh, and then hopefully at the end of the day, 10, 12 years down the road, there is some money potentially.
Hmm.
So this new capital gains tax, essentially what it does is creates more risk into investing into Canada and then more risk into being an entrepreneur in Canada. So it essentially reduces the ROI on your money. But also you add it on top of the other taxes that we already pay, which is way higher than the US,
Yeah.
for example. Um, it just adds more uncertainty that is not needed. The biggest issue with this capital gains tax is that it's not needed to begin with, right?
Hmm.
It's just not needed. It's supposed to generate $6 billion, which is nothing. I mean, um, our deficit in the spring budget there in the fall economic statement was 62 billion, so
Hmm.
it's nothing. We can cut a few programs and we'll save a few unessential programs that we just recklessly spending money on without any show for services for it, and we can save more than that. So this is just a desperate government that knows only one thing, and it's just to tax, 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 rather than okay, how do we become fiscally responsible, and how do we start thinking of how to develop the economy.
One thing that I notice, which I think is kind of leading behind a little bit this motivation for that new tax, is the Liberal government has kind of pushed this classivism, like class division. So basically, we're going to tax the rich so you can save some taxes. But I think a lot of people don't understand the economic impact of increasing a capital gains tax. It's not. it's not the company that's going to end up losing. It's eventually going to be the people buying the products. It's essentially going to make the products more expensive.
Well, it
Like
will just have
it's going
less
to,
companies to begin with,
yes,
right?
yes.
So
And
that's the
less
problem.
jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but they push this narrative. And unfortunately, like even when you look online, I've seen like so many people who just don't never had an economics macroeconomics class, don't understand the impact that that has on the economy. And I find a lot of the times the opposition have failed at kind of getting the general public to understand why this will affect you, not just the rich. And
Mhm.
they've kind of haven't broken through that that I call it propaganda of division within between classes. Do you think, and I will admit, though, I'll give credit where it's due, Pierre and a few of the MPs have kind of through that with that video. Like I watched that video and it made it so simplified. It was so easy to understand. I
Mhm.
just don't think every Canadian will watch it to understand it.
Yeah.
But yeah, where do you think maybe they could improve so that everyday regular Canadian can understand it the same way you and I do?
From the opposition point of view,
Mhm.
well, I think I think it's an interesting question because, in general, I don't think the Conservatives have been aggressive enough addressing a lot
Mhm.
of issues in Canada, right? They've been writing, uh, there's like essentially a saying and strategy when to, don't interrupt the enemy when it does self harm, which is what the Liberals have been doing. So the
Mhm.
Conservative essentially been just poking a little here and there and writing more into back, letting the Liberals do their thing. But I think in general, the conservatives have probably peaked, which is, I would say close to a fair estimate. And it's time
Mhm.
for them to go aggressively after issues in Canada. The Liberals have a leadership race. There'll be a lot of ideas thrown out, and the Conservatives can't just sit quietly without ideas and just react. So they have to lead, and they really have to uh, create, I would say, a hope in Canada. One of the powerful things that Donald Trump does in the US and why he won, essentially, is because he can create hope for the future. They're
Mhm.
gonna make the country safer. Here's how. They're gonna reduce taxes. They're gonna attract investment. Blah blah blah. They're they're not holding back on how great they'll make America. But the Canadian side of the politics, and it's such a cultural thing, is we're afraid to be great. We're afraid to be successful. We're afraid to boast that that's what we're gonna do. And we need to hear that. We need to see that. We need to feel that. Canadians, are all-time record on affordability. People are suffering. They can't buy a home. So that's essentially why the Liberals are doing bad. They're not Conservatives are not doing good because of conservative ideas right now. They're doing good because the Liberals are so bad to the country. So the Conservatives need to change it. The fact that we even considering being a 51st state with so many Canadians is really a testament to how negligent the message of hope has been to Canadians.
Mhm. So with that, what would be your suggestion for them to do better messaging, to push that message of hope with Canadians? Because you're right. Like I remember when Trump did that joke, I did a post and it was like 90% people were saying, yes, we would be better off as part of the US. So that means they don't even see the alternative to the Liberal Party any better. So
Hmm.
where could conservatives improve with their messaging other than just we're better than them?
Yeah, it's the trust in politics and politicians in general
Yeah.
achieving anything has really eroded, right, over the last 10 years. And we're just seeing um, committee after committee of pointless things, wasting time, like online, like even just this whole just going after $9 million and spending here, $20 million after spending that. Like it's just such irrelevant numbers in the Canadian spectrum that for the average Canadian to try to get to watch this and be engaged in politics, it's so irrelevant when we have hundreds of billions of dollars in budget and in spending, and we're not
Mhm.
thinking much more in the future than let's cancel the carbon tax, right? It doesn't
Mhm.
do anything to the average Canadian, like in a messaging point of view. So they really need to start giving a message of hope of what economic systems you're going to change. Are you going to mass deport people or not? How are you going to do that, right? Like Trump had uh, zero fears to say anything that sounded aggressive. In Canada, we
Mhm.
just we just don't do that. We're not as a conservative country as the U.S. to begin with, so I understand why I guess the messaging can't be as conservative in general. But we just need to start hearing hope. But I also want to see the messaging not as centralized. Like much of the messaging right now is coming from uh, Pierre and his videos and all this. Oh, I get it to try to promote him, but there are
Where's everyone else?
whereas everybody else exactly, and the messaging need to come from every single conservative MP and potential in the running. Because if the conservatives are doing as good as they think they are in the polls, they have a lot of seats to fill up, and those people need to start being vocal in their communities. With the messaging just can't be decentralized. It has to be just as loud as peers, just as good as peers, from every single MP, from every single office, and locally as well. So we need to start reaching people.
Yeah. And like this line, we need a carbon tax election. Every time I hear it, I cringe. I'm
Yeah,
like, okay, can we get rid of that? It's already there's been liberal, even though we can't trust it, but the people running for the Liberal Party, many of them have said they won't push the carbon tax. We know that's probably not true, but the I think people are done overhearing it. Our election is more than just a carbon tax. And what you
mm,
said is right. We need a message of hope. And I'm wondering if my listeners have any suggestion or if you have suggestion. What would be like at first his line was bring home like prosperity, bring home what we used to have, bring home freedom and all of that. That's a little bit more of a hopeful message. But
yeah,
like Trump just started with this like golden age of the US, right?
I
That
know.
that's just in the last little bit. And that line is so awesome because who can kind of twist that? We
Mhm.
want the golden age of the US. We want it to be the best it's ever been. So, what would be a good one? I don't know if you have ideas on what would be a good one. So maybe we can push it to their team. But it's so
Yeah,
true. Like
yeah.
it
I
we
mean,
need a carbon tax election doesn't inspire anyone, doesn't give anyone
no,
hope.
it's completely irrelevant, really. Out
Yeah.
of the if you look at the top things that the Canada is facing or deal with right now, the carbon tax is irrelevant. And I
Yeah.
get it; they're going to try to attack Mark Carney with it, and he will probably pivot to carbon tax to be fundamentally smarter, like from his point of view, from the
Mhm.
economic point of view. Because right now, carbon tax, the way it's structured right now, is just such a headache at all levels of government, at all levels of business.
Mhm.
So he'll definitely pivot it. But the issues that Mark Carney will bring, so let's remember, so the conservatives were polling really well against Justin Trudeau. Now they'll have to try to poll really well against someone else into the next election. So I wouldn't be riding this high horse that we have in the last couple months. We need to anticipate anything. And the differences with Mark Carney is his his background is economics and financials, and uh, he rolled up his sleeves and been on the other side of of this public sector. He's been there under the hood.
Mhm.
He's seeing how the financials, how everything works, so he can orchestrate things a lot better than what Justin Trudeau's
Mhm.
incompetent government could with Chrystia Freeland, who is essentially financially illiterate, right?
Mhm.
So the ideas that uh, Mark will bring to the table, I think, will be on a total different level than what Trudeau government is currently talking. And if you look at the Carney's announcement, like he's talked about like how horrible the current situation is in Canada. He's like, he probably mentioned or hinted at it at least 10 different times during his own leadership campaign for the Liberal government that he
Mhm.
said has been so bad for Canada. So, there'll be really pivotal economic policies. And we need to, the conservative side needs to essentially race ahead of that and start building hope, start building more foundation that they can, campaign on, rather than Mark Carney is,
Trudeau 2.0.
2.0, or he's a carbon tax proponent. Yeah, so what? What do you got, right?
Mhm.
Because he's gonna bring like heavy duty stuff to the table, I think.
Yeah, and the thing is, Mark Carney is a lot smarter than Trudeau.
Hmm.
He's a lot smarter when it comes to psychological, um, manipulation and things like that. So, versus Trudeau might have been, like, charismatic at the beginning, but I think people see through it. But Mark Carney, he's kinda been through the ringer and has pushed his agenda in many places, and he's kinda destroyed those places, like in the UK and stuff, and they've come out and said, Don't put him as your prime minister, he'll destroy your country too." But he is someone that's new that nobody knows.
And he's gonna
So
bring
I
refreshing ideas. I think that's
Yeah,
the whole point, and they're gonna be high level ideas.
yeah, and people will be like, "Oh, that sounds so good." And if the conservatives don't have anything to counter that, it'll be easy for them to point out, "Well, how are you gonna fix this?"
Mhm.
And but you're right. He and there's no, like, huge negative attachment to him like there is with Trudeau right now. So do you think Mark Carney is gonna be the one, like, who's gonna lead the way in the Liberal race? Like, do you think he's,
Yeah,
like, the one to beat?
yeah, I think so. Like, there is no point really, um, voting for Freeland. Like, we know she's a disaster. Everyone knows she doesn't really have that
Mhm,
much support in her own party right now. Uh,
mhm,
Carney has huge support from the party and a lot of special interest groups from outside the party.
mhm,
Um, so it doesn't make sense for them not to have him win as well from internal politics point of view. He really wants to pivot the Liberal Party back to the pre-Trudeau level, and I think that'll be good. And I just want to comment again. I think the important point from the strategy point of view, the Conservative shouldn't be in a position to counter Mark Carney's economic points or policies. He needs to be into position
ahead.
to counter them first, to counter them, because they need to be ahead. They need to have
Mhm,
more ideas out there. They need to have much more hope out there, um, for prosperity, for what the country would look like, than he does. So they need to put him in his place, that it's his role to try to counter them. They should not be fighting off the back foot like they're gonna start to pretty soon.
mhm. And I find too, they don't know who's gonna win, so right now they're kinda attacking at all the candidates. If they wait till the leadership race is done, we might have an election within, like, a month or 2 from there, so there won't be a
Probably
lot of
right away.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, there won't be a lot of time to even counter, like, this would be their perfect opportunity to just let Canadian know exactly who they are, like, as in the Conservatives,
Mhm.
and then pivot what Mark Carney will be against what they believe in.
Mhm.
So yeah, and there's not a lot of time. Do you think though, I know some people have been throwing around that when if Carney wins, he becomes a prime minister. Do you think the NDP will team up with the Liberal again to kind of keep them on a pedestal so they can push back the election? And somebody even mentioned that the election could even be pushed back as far as 2026, but I haven't seen like confirmation of that.
Well,
What do
within
you
our
think?
institution, it can be 5 years, right?
Yeah.
So that's why the 2026 date. I mean, I don't hold anything past Jagmeet Singh. I mean, the party is broke, is a desperate fool for anything. So, um, he missed himself a golden opportunity when the Liberals were tanking under to Trudeau to call an election and actually win seats from them. But
Yeah.
now the Liberals will regroup and they'll probably eat up, to NDP. Even though Mark
Mhm.
Carney in his speech, which was really important, uh, he moved from the NDP agenda, which is essentially when he talked about, um, kind of hinted at printing money and redistributing of wealth. When he talked about, there's nothing to essentially redistribute right now in Canada. So he's, yeah, which is quite a critical point that he made there
Mhm.
uh, to kind of signal that he's going to be moving the party towards more the center on a lot of policies, which I think was kind of missed in general. I tweeted it out, but I think in general in the Canadian discourse, it was such an important point that was missed. Um, so yeah, I don't hold anything past the NDP because they're so easy to buy, and if we getting into this tariff war with the U.S., which is just so silly to begin with, um, the NDP can keep supporting if they get thrown a bone. So
Mhm.
we could be back to square one just the way we were.
Yeah. Other than the economic aspect, oh, before I move to that question, I want to know your thoughts on the tariff war. What do you think Trump is doing? Like, you have a lot of friends in the US that probably quite connected. Do you think he's actually trying to make Canada the 51st state? Like, what do you think his motive is? Do you think he will be implementing the 25% tariff? Or do you think it might be to create some pressure and governmental change so that their country to the north is not as much of a threat to them if it was to have like a conservative friendly government?
Yeah, like at the end of the day, when Trump lays down to bed, nobody knows what he thinks. But y- he's positioning. Uh, he's negotiating from a massive position of strength.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he can throw out, and he's excited, right? He's riding to win, to a huge wave, and so he can boast and say big things right now. He's just excited. the The problem is not as much as the tariffs. The problem is that, um, if Trump puts tariffs on Canadians, which is essentially our oil, um, it's going to hurt them more than it's going to hurt us. But the
Mhm.
problem is not the tariffs. So let's remember, we bring in a lot of heavy crude into there. Trump already said he's not going to bring any oil from Venezuela, so which essentially
Oh.
competes with us. So uh, so he doesn't really have any other supplies right now of a lot of stuff, right? Over 30 states are dependent on energy from us. So it's such a daring thing to say that he's going to put tariffs on us at 25% on our energy without really much consideration to it. Now, the other aspect of it is the AI and quantum computing development into US. Right now, they announced $500 billion investment into it
Mhm.
from the corporate side. So that requires massive amounts of energy, massive.
Mhm.
And which actually the data center requirement into US for energy wise is going to be the demand is going to grow by 300% within the next 5 years, which is huge.
Wow.
So it's going to be over 10% of the US total energy demand. Uh, so they need to supplement it, which is why you see Microsoft trying to restart nuclear plants. Everything is being open around energy because they need it.
Mhm.
There is no other ifs or buts about it. They can't do what they're saying on the investment side without additional energy.
Mhm.
It's just a simple input output situation. Um, so putting those massive tariffs on us is not going to do to us any good, and I hope that someone is gonna talk sense into him internally. I get it. He's bitter at the Liberal government. He's bitter at the Canadian government because the Liberals have essentially insulted, made fun of him, didn't think he was going to win.
Mhm.
Um, you know, which is such a huge. foul from I would say from a global uh, relationships point of view. Like we shouldn't be insulting and making fun of our strongest best ally as well, right? So
Mhm.
we can
Mhm.
be upset when he responds with a middle finger back to us
Mhm.
after we've been throwing eggs at the window for so long. um, so so we own that one from that point. I just really hope that we can someone can talk sense out of it. But the issue for Canada is not exactly tariffs. And I say let them tariff, let him do the tariffs if he wants to. He wants to. We can't respond the way this idiotic Team Canada is talking about. What we
Yeah.
need to do is start building our economy ASAP. Start diversifying. Like all you hear from this Team Canada is what we will fight back with. We can't fight with an economy that 10 times, 15 times bigger than us.
Yeah.
What we need to do is start developing our economy, become more self-sufficient. Everything that I talked about for the last 10 years, really. But it's and we need to create more export markets for us.
Mhm.
And there is, everyone in the government is thinking how much danger we're under with those tariffs, but except word salads, they're not doing anything else, which is a huge issue.
Mhm. Danielle Smith's been raising awareness to this. So I've been watching some of her interviews. She's doing two things. One, she's saying, let's stop threatening counter tariff. Let's instead convince the US how doing these tariffs is just as bad for them as it is for us. Let's talk to them about what we can do to increase their production, not just the oil. Like they get our oil at a discount, but then they refine it and they do things with it and then they resell it. So they actually benefit from it. So she was doing that, but there was another point that she's been making about, and that's how our own government, our own federal government has stood in the way of us being self-sufficient and not so dependent on the US. Like Canada East Pipeline is a perfect example of
Mhm.
that. You have Quebec and New Brunswick that get their oil from the Middle East when we have perfectly good oil in Canada. We have enough oil that we could produce for all of
We
Canada,
even
but
brought
yet we're
oil
not.
from Russia recently, and I don't know if people realize it,
Really?
but yeah.
I didn't
So
know that.
if you flew a plane in the last little while in Canada, you're most likely have used Russian oil at some
Wow.
point. Uh, Not a lot of it, but we still have, which is absolutely insane.
Yeah. Yeah, when you think about it, that is insane, especially when we have the reserves that we have right now. So it's hard to not take that Ottawa's against Alberta when they're openly shutting down projects, shutting down things that could help us become more self-sufficient. So
Yeah.
that's just the oil and gas, but there's a million other things in Canada that has done the exact opposite of what we should have been doing.
Mhm.
One of the greatest thing, and I don't know if I've talked about it just between you and I or on this show, is the deregulation that's happening in the US, that we're doing the exact opposite. We're putting more red tape into every project, everything, creating more of a risk for capital investments into Canada. Do you think that deregulating Canada the way the US is could potentially be a message of hope from coming from the conservative? I
100%.
have seen Pierre talk about this
Mhm.
over and over again, but I don't know if it's making mainstream on why this would be important. But I almost think like Canada should do everything it can to become more successful than the US. We have more natural
Imagine that.
resources per
Yeah.
capita. Yeah, that would be an excellent. Let's become better than the US. Like,
Yeah. And I
but
think it's
they're not
doable,
that.
actually.
Yeah, it is. There has been a project too, just announced in Alberta, the data center. I was going to
The,
try to
the
bring it up.
Wonderland, yeah.
Yeah, Wonderland or Wonder. Is it called Wonderland?
I think so, yeah. After
I'm
Kevin
going
and
to see.
release.
Yeah, yeah. Have you been involved with that? Like, do you know much details about it?
Well, it's essentially a business plan, right? And I mean,
Yeah.
it requires billions of dollars that obviously Kevin doesn't have. So it's essentially a fundraising hope of here's my business plan, here's what we're gonna do, and let's try to raise money for it. That's essentially what it is. Um, the local First Nations tribe did come out against it because they didn't get consulted in there. So it's, I mean, I'm sure they will approve it because of the amount of money involved, but I'm not sure how they will pivot the deal in general.
Mhm.
But they did come out against it. So it's essentially, a pie in the sky business plan, which, I mean,
Mhm.
all for it if it works. I mean, the location is a bit pain in the butt to try to attract talent into, but
Yeah.
if we create proper infrastructure, then we could. But going back to the red tape conversation, I think it's important because Canada is essentially start copying to European Union with a whole bunch of BS. Our interprovincial trade red tape is equals to 21% in tariffs.
Wow.
So nobody does more damage to Canada than Canadian policies. And this is the big issue that we got here. So, and yet nobody is talking about removing those tariffs, like those interprovincial, all those premiers met together, and nobody talks about removing red tape from each other. This Team Canada meets and doesn't talk about, how they can actually improve Canada, right? They think they can pick a fight with the US, which is completely the wrong conversation to have.
Mhm.
We did say no to a whole bunch of uh, oil and gas projects. But the issue is not just oil and gas. Oil and gas is super important to Canada because it's essentially printing money, but also because it's so high in productivity. But we have to attract future economies as well. The beauty about the US is they have quantum computers. They have there's flying car innovation, drones.
Mhm.
There is robotics. There is all those chip manufacturing, all those things. Canada doesn't have any of it anymore, right? We do
Mhm.
have some quantum computing play, but our strongest company in it has moved their headquarters to the US. I think it was last year or a couple of years ago. So we're losing the most fundamental important industries or don't even participate in them. They'll be important in 5, 10, 20
Mhm.
years down the road. And nobody is even talking about it. And I think that is such a, a crucial mistake that we're having into our future. Even if we can build all the oil and gas pipelines in the world and that we need them and all the refinery and all this stuff, we'll get probably extra 100 $200 billion a year to our GDP, but we can generate, I mean, that's still worth less than some of the tech companies in the US, right?
Mhm.
There are US tech companies that are worth more than Canada put together, like on a market cap
Mhm.
value. So we need to get into that space. We need to have that innovation, and we're not even we're not even a player in it anymore, which is highly unfortunate. uh,
Mhm.
I kind of poke at it, but Canada is essentially becoming like a third world colony to the US. They need our resources. They take it from us discount. They need to hire people at discount. They open an office here, use their American dollars, pay Canadian employees less because they have
Mhm.
no other options at essentially jobs, tech jobs. And
Mhm.
so we're essentially being utilized to create more wealth and productivity into US right now, but we're not doing it for ourselves and our future.
Yeah, and that project, that $70 billion project that was like has been floating, the big basis behind it is there's abundant energy source there, so the natural
Yeah,
gas.
and
And
it's cooler. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and these AI data centers, they just produce a ton of heat, right? So you need to keep
Mhm.
that cool. And so in Saskatchewan, I don't know if you saw today, I set notification to get notified of certain announcement, but Scott Moe made an announcement about, it was about a coal plants, but in his announcement, if you listen to it, he talks about until we get nuclear energy to the forefront, we're going to be using our coal plants no matter what Ottawa is saying. So you're seeing a bit of pushback against Ottawa finally.
Mhm.
But where do you think nuclear fits? into all of this. Do you have much knowledge on some of the plans that are coming
Yeah.
into Canada, or do you think nuclear is not even on the table, on the radar for, because Trump actually talked about this at the World Economic Forum.
Mhm.
If people haven't watched it, I watched it this morning. I think it was during the questions. He says we're gonna up our game in nuclear, and this is where we have an advantage. We have a
Yeah.
lot of uranium, a lot of the materials needed for nuclear.
And
Do you know?
we were a pioneer. Canada was a pioneer at nuclear
Mhm,
at one point. I actually wrote an article about it called "Fission Until Fusion," because nuclear reaction is based on fission. But it's sustainable, long-term,
mhm,
cheap energy. The name of the game to generate productivity and economic growth is cheap inputs. And energy is one of the most important things for future economies because, like you said, like data centers that
mhm,
produce a lot of heat, they require a lot of energy. So the cheaper inputs we can provide, the more competitive we can be in the great scheme of things. But also, it's making energy expensive for people in general makes no sense uh, from an ROI point of view because it takes away money from the economy that's spending on hard costs. There is no ROI uh, on spending more money on energy, but there is ROI spending less money on energy and more things on in the economy that have fundamental growth, such as, for example, investing in startups or buying different goods that have, uh, you know, evolutionary importance and small businesses essentially.
mhm. What do you mean by RI? What does that stand for?
ROI, return on investment.
Okay, return on
Yeah,
investment. Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. So I said it quick, I know, but
No,
yeah,
no,
so
that's okay. I
yeah,
just wanted
so
to make sure, my if I didn't know what it means, there's a chance my listeners didn't either.
yeah, so
So,
there's all those hard costs that
mhm,
Canada essentially increased for itself. Like for example, like with the carbon tax, right? Like
mhm,
why is our businesses paying thousands of dollars a year in carbon tax? Where they could be spending thousands of dollars a year more on hiring people, on investing in R&D, right? So it just removes money out of the economy without letting that money have a chance at higher productivity roll
yeah,
into the economy. So that's one of the most important things. So, and energy is an input into a whole bunch of industry, right? From trucking, which
mhm,
is our supply chain, to essentially everything that we do, including future industries such as AI and data centers. So, and nuclear has a huge uh, role in it because it's predictive, right? Like you
mhm,
can build a nuclear plant, essentially what it will do for the next 40, 50 years, right? And that's, the return that smoothens out your risk curve, it smoothens out your cost and everything else involved in it. So once you build it, you're off to the races essentially.
mhm,
And we need to do that. So for Canada, we need to think about how do we change our energy needs that they become cheaper for us now, but also what that picture looks like in 20, 30, 40 years ago. Sorry, ahead into the future.
mhm,
And the other aspect of it is essentially nuclear is going to be super important until we crack fusion, which is the holy grail of energy, which is essentially limitless cheap energy. If you look through human evolution, energy production became small and small per square foot, right? We don't need to cut forests to light fire
mhm,
anymore. We don't need
mhm,
to hunt whales to create, to have blubber for oil and all that. And so the energy production in general with innovation, the square footage of it is small and small and smaller. And nuclear has one of the most smallest square foot per energy outputs out there. So even from an environmental point, I mean, that's the cleanest energy source we can have right now. We don't need
mhm,
to occupy acres upon acres of farmland to put solar and wind, which has a short lifespan in comparison. We need to use a fraction of the land and develop huge long-term, predictable, sustainable energy. And fusion is going to be even smaller eventually. And there's a lot of companies making good headway in it, but I wish Canada again participated in that.
So fusion is nuclear energy, but on a smaller scale? Is that what it is?
Yeah, well, that's a complicated
Like,
way
because
to
my husband talks about the small
smart nuclear
nuclear.
reactor. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
it's
So
not the same.
it's not the same.
No,
Okay.
yeah, it's
So what is it?
well, so the way you crack fusion, it's probably easier just to read the article on my Substack, but it's
I was trying to find it while you were
it,
talking, but I
it's
haven't been
down
able to
there
find it.
somewhere. But it's easier to it just the energy amount of energy it produces. It's essentially like almost like creating stars, right? You crack, you collide things uh, in atoms, and they just produce uh, essentially endless amounts of free energy once you do it. So they can make their reaction. It's just so far right now, it takes more energy to create the fusion reaction than it produces.
Okay.
So once that equation turns around, then we're essentially off to the races.
So this would be a whole new different type of energy source that's
It's a
not
whole
even nuclear.
evolution. Yeah. So
Oh, okay, okay.
there's essentially two technological revolutions that are coming. One is quantum computing and one is fusion. And
Okay.
Canada barely has any participation in either one of them. But it's I actually want to open like a quantum computing uh, I guess based in Calgary or in BC. But those two are probably one of the most important revolutions that coming in our lifetime, which is very exciting. That and
So
getting off the planet.
what is exactly quantum computing?
um,
Like dumb it down for me.
yeah. So the way our current computers or current calculations work, they're essentially binary, right? So you have ones and zeros, and
Mhm.
essentially that's how it works. So whenever you put in a request for a computer, a calculation, whatever you do, essentially it's all calculations. It's just written different in code, and we think about it differently, but it's all essentially calculative instructions to computing. It does it in ones and zeros, right? So, and I mean the length is huge, right? It's the
Mhm.
combination of ones zeros. um, so you can essentially do only one action at the same time, right? So quantum computing, you can do it with one and zeros, but they can uh, they can also be a one or a zero at the same state at the same time. So that changes the way the calculations or the way the computers work completely drastically. So your most powerful computer in the world right now, and quantum computing already operational in general, by the way. Um, what it will take it a million years to calculate, the most powerful computer in the world today, a quantum computer can probably do it in 5 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So it's a complete uh, it's a complete paradigm shift to computing and discovery. Because what happens right now when we thinking about how do we change, material discovery, data science, how do we discover drugs and all those things, with quantum computing you can calculate the same amount of just different questions, different parameters, different probabilities, different uh, equations all at the same time, where with typical computers you'll have to do it one by one essentially. So so the change that we can do right now in material science is just so huge, absolutely huge. What will take scientists in a lab to do years upon decades, we can do it with quantum computing in the next 10 minutes.
So I have a question. So my conspiratorial mind is going somewhere really awful. Part of me is really excited about that, and I've talked about like the AI technology. I'm personally very involved. I use AI quite a bit
Mhm.
and in everything that I do day to day. So with all of this new advancements that's going to happen so very quick, are there risks, like if the quantum computer can do so much in so little, are there risk of like data collection to be used against its people to manipulate or motivate or you kind of know the direction I'm going, almost like
Mhm.
an iRobot movie kind of thing where the quantum computers take over the world and we're just like slaves. I'm not saying that that's
Yeah.
actually happening, but parts of me realize we're at a moment where the internet was started and everything changed. And
Mhm.
now AI has started, everything's about to change. Now you have these quantum computers that can process things that we humans probably would never be able to process in our lifetime. So how and I guess my biggest fear is if this technology is advanced in other countries that have a nefarious agenda, which I think all countries, when you give people power, it goes to that area
Mhm.
often. I'd rather it be in a free country than it is like, let's say, China. But the quantum computers, like, where are they? Are they all over the world right now, or is there just specific countries who have
Yeah.
access?
Uh, I don't know how to express myself how excited I am about quantum computers
Mhm,
and how important it is, but it's there's essentially a few players in it. Microsoft, Intel, a few smaller companies, and obviously China as well. Quantum computing is an arms race. Like there is no second, there is nothing else. People shouldn't take it in any kind of way. What it can do to humanity is so pivotal, is just absolutely
mhm,
incredible. It's going to be a total different era for discovery and for innovation, but it's also an arms race because it takes a long time to uh, develop it. It takes a long time to nail to innovation. Companies are spending billions on it, but the qubits calculation have already increased dramatically, and anyone that falls behind it is just going to be out of a complete sector, out of a whole
mhm,
complete industry. So, but think about the secondary industries that come out of it. If you can innovate drugs, if you can innovate new materials within minutes, within months, and start producing them within a couple of years, rather than go through years of R&D or decades, at
mhm,
some point, that puts you in a total different game plan than countries don't have access to it.
mhm,
So from a competition point of view, it's essentially like going to war, with a pitchfork when someone has, a tank.
mhm,
So it's going to be a total different economic transition, and it's long term. And the promise for countries like Canada, we have some of that, and we actually have a quantum strategy within the government. They spend a couple $1 billion investing in some companies, which is essentially nothing. Um, we need to have those long term investment positions because those things take years, while the government, essentially business plans are 4 years, so they don't really work together. So we need to have this long term strategy to create this future innovations that we really just ignore and hope someone else somehow
mhm.
will do it, and will tax the crap out of them if they're successful, right? So we just need to be a lot more cognitive of our future positioning rather than what's here now.
So basically, if we don't catch up, we're quantum computer will basically mean if a country has it, they're a first world country. If any other country doesn't, they're going to be a third world country. Do you agree with kind of that
you,
statement? It might get to that kind of point.
you know what, it's actually not a bad analogy in general. Like I would agree with that.
Yeah.
In general, because the stuff that will come out of it is will be incredible.
And you're seeing that with AI too. Like companies who are embracing it, who are bringing it in, are saving millions and millions of dollars versus before. And
Mhm.
and then some countries are just not even wanting to touch it. And I think they're going to fall behind. Same thing with the internet was the same kind of. There's like times in
Yeah,
in history
absolutely.
where innovation has completely changed the trajectory of humanity. And I,
Mhm.
I think AI is one of them, but we have we have so many things coming in at the same time. Do you think that quantum computer is going to be have an involvement with that new project that's coming to Alberta, the
Mm,
data center?
no,
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 not at all. Okay.
probably not a lot. No. if any
Okay.
at all. Yeah, but the so you actually touch base at a very important direction. How innovation improves essentially companies in our society, and this is one of the biggest mistakes we've done with mass immigration in Canada is bringing millions of low skilled labor to do jobs that are should be obsolete. Now, one of the strengths that we have as a country is we're fairly small. Like, we have 42 million people, uh, but we do produce a lot because of our oil and gas and everything else. So we have quite a bit of money to do stuff. But the issue is we redesign our labor force structure in the last few years where we brought in millions of people of low skilled labor to do
Mhm.
essentially irrelevant jobs, right? As a nation, we want to make those jobs obsolete. We don't want to have more of them, right? We want to bring in technology, we want to bring in robotics, we want to bring all those things so we can uplift the overall level in our economy and in our society. So, but what we've done is we brought in millions of people of low skilled labor that could be obsolete. So, which puts such a high societal risk for us because in the next
Mhm.
2, 3, 5 years, we're going to have millions of people that essentially have no applicable skills to a lot of anything else. And those jobs are going to be gone. So, we're going to have millions of people that are going to be on uh, on essentially dependent on taxpayer funding, which is where UBI conversation originated from, rather
Yeah.
than not have those people here, invest in innovation, bring up everyone else. Like low skilled entry jobs should not be careers. We should just try to move people within our education system, train for the next you know business cycle, essentially the next evolutionary innovations, rather than bringing people to do largely irrelevant jobs that still doesn't really put a net tax input into the system anyways.
Mhm.
So that's a huge risk that Canada is facing. And really, talking about the next election, there'll be nothing more important than deporting all those people that shouldn't be here. Like we need to create a rebalance, and we can easily cut taxes after that. But we really
Mhm.
need to rebalance our labor force pool because that is absolutely crucial if we want to, have a sustainable society essentially going forward.
Yeah, and I think immigration is one of those subject and conversation that elected officials have been so afraid or in the past so afraid to address and talk about. I mean, you're seeing the exact opposite in the US, but you've seen that debate too, like that H1B. um uh I'm fully okay with immigration of like the coming in from the best and the brightest minds of the
Mm-hmm.
world, especially if we
100%.
want to become the most innovative. So bring in those high skill immigration. But what you're saying is the low skill immigration, and that has been way overboard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also brought in this conversation that that has happened, even like our youth. Usually, like McDonald's jobs used to be for people still in high school or just out of high school while they were still going to
100%. Yeah.
college. It was like your first job experience. It taught you to be on time. It taught you responsibility,
Hmm.
um,
It's the
risk.
foundation,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
the foundation. That was my first job. I think I was like 14 or 15, whatever age you can first work. As soon as I turn that age, I applied to McDonald's, and it taught me like you show up on time, you try to do your job properly. You don't want to have your cash under not have enough like balance
The
by the
float,
end of the
yeah.
day. And it taught me customer service, like when you're dealing with someone screaming at you because you did the
Socializing, yeah.
burger. Yeah, yeah, it taught me so many things. But the youth of today, almost like they go to school, and I'm generalizing, obviously this is not the case for everyone, but you go to school, you go to college, you get a career, but they're having a hard time getting entrance into those low skill jobs to
Hmm.
gain that initial experience. So it's not just affecting what the future, which what you describe, it's affecting our current generation who
Yeah.
can't go out and get a part-time job while in school and gain some skills. So I think it has a negative effects as a whole. And Vivek Ramaswamy had made a video as well talking about this and its effect on income, its effect on paying and stuff. And I used to be all for it. Like if you asked me like 3 years ago, I would have been like, well, no, people don't want to do the jobs. That's why they bring them in. But
Mhm.
we went to Montana last, not this Christmas, but Christmas before. If you go to Montana, to Billings, Montana, is almost zero immigrants there. Everyone who works at every fast food, everyone who works at
All
every,
kids.
they're all kids or just adults too,
Yeah.
but they're not immigrants.
Mhm.
And I said, Jonathan, how do they get people to work? And so we looked it up, and the Montana is one of the highest paid rates for McDonald's in all of the U.S.
Mhm.
Yet the prices are the same, they function the same. So, but they have to increase their rate of pay to be able to bring in. So, I honestly believe them opening our borders to low skill workers has actually decreased the rate of
100%.
pay.
100%.
Yeah,
I actually talking about it. I think I tweeted about it last year, the year before. Like I did a road trip to the U.S. Well, we go there all the time, but
yeah,
I did a long road trip, and I stopped by McDonald's, as you know, as you do on the way in different small towns, and I posted a photo of like the hiring sign and how much they make, and it is quite a bit. Like it's
yeah,
$20 a little bit more in those small towns an hour, which is 24 $25 equivalent to Canadians, and
yeah,
that's absolutely it. They have to invest more to attract locally, right?
yeah,
So the issue that Canada did is again is bring all those low skilled labor people that are now competing with our future generation, and they're doing those jobs as career now because there is nothing, no other job they can do because our economy is not as robust, but also the skill level and the skill transition is not as fluid.
yeah,
So we essentially bloated our bottom labor force spectrum at the expense of our future generation. And that's why Canada's youth unemployment is so high,
yeah.
right? Like there hasn't been any net, uh, essentially net job creation uh, for the demographics in the last couple of years, net employment growth, which is absolutely astronomical.
Hmm.
As someone who's trying to save money for school, as someone who's just trying to do
Hmm.
things, right? So we removed it from the economy and from our society, and that's exactly on top of all the hard skills and soft skills that those kids can learn being at a work at in a work environment, which is absolutely crucial to overall development.
So, what would you say the answer to all this problem? There's talks of mass deportation, and then with that also come the fact that our birth rate in Canada, we're facing a population crisis, uh, and I think in part that's why they're bringing in so many people. I'd be okay with them bringing in people if it was matching the amount of construction that we have, if they were highly skilled people like doctors, engineers, people who
Mm.
can actually produce a lot more to society than they take. Like you said, we're going to be facing a case in a few years where you're going to have all those low skills that won't really have jobs that they can do. But how do we address the low birth rate that we're facing so we don't get population collapse?
Yeah, so uh, I think crisis is like quite a overblown word here
Okay.
in this example. So I wouldn't say it's that drastic. And I also want to say that a small population, right? So the liberals essentially trying to do the Century Initiative, which is to bring Canada's population to 100 million people for no particular reason, right? It's just a lobbying group.
Mhm.
Our small population ish, I mean, 40 million people is still not small, is really such a strength to create prosperity in our country if we produce more,
True.
increase our productivity. So Canadians can't afford to have kids when they can't afford houses,
Mhm.
right? Afford kids when the government takes 50% of their income, when they're trying to budget on how they're gonna spend on diapers, right?
Mhm.
Uh, we can't feed kids, when there's a whole milk cartel that rather get farmers to spill milk down the drain than give it to our kids. So we have a whole bunch of policies that are snowballing each other that makes it less affordable and less appealing to have kids. Right? Our communities are starting to change because of the way we build houses. So, for example, we started to build like 300 square foot shit boxes essentially. Like, who is that for, right? That's not for living, that's just for surviving, right?
Mhm.
So the only reason there is appetite for the kind of living is because of desperation, because there is no other options,
Yeah.
right? Because we brought in so many people, there is no other living options. It's either the streets or a shit box, or you live 10 people into a house. So we created living conditions into our society that's essentially third world like. So by removing some of the demand pressures out of our economy, it's going to start to rebalance, and then we're going to need to start rewarding Canadians to have kids. Because right now, we essentially, if you come here, move to Canada with 5, 7 kids, you getting, uh, your child tax benefit is going to be, with that, thousands of dollars a month. You don't really have to work.
Mhm.
So right now, Canadians are essentially slaves to fund foreign kids,
Mhm.
which makes no sense at all. So rather than spending billions on housing illegals and asylums and other people, rather than spending billions on feeding and financing other families and kids from abroad, we need to spend or save the same amount of money into people's pockets within Canada to encourage them to have kids, and
Mhm.
that's turn around. So we can't make everything expensive for Canadians, make it barely affordable to live. Never mind provide for another human being, and then expect them to produce more.
Do you think like I talk about this often. I have a shirt. I call it's like a pajama shirt, but it's a shirt. It's just too big. That's why I don't wear it out. But it talks about Tax Freedom Day, and it has a quote from like a famous person. But when he said that quote, it's something like, "Taxes are the price we pay for civil society." But back then, the Tax Freedom Day was January 15th. So
Oh, that's so
which
nice.
means you work for 2 weeks and all the money you make for that 2 weeks goes to the government, but the rest of the year it's all your money.
Mhm.
And right now the Tax Freedom Day is June 19th. And I
Yeah,
think it's even more than that. I think this is
yeah.
an old calculation if you add
Well,
all the other
that's just
tax,
income tax, right? There's all the different taxes
all
and
these
fees we
other.
pay just living.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that the June 19, I think it included the average taxes that someone would pay, but when we look at everything, even my husband and I, we're doing a budget, and we're in the process of doing our taxes, and so discouraging to see how much you send and what it's being used for, all of the government waste. Like, Pierre talked about all of the money that the government has spent on consulting, just
yeah,
consultants. You can't even track that, and it was something in like $200 billion.
yeah,
It was insane.
yeah,
And
yeah. 20. It's over 20 billion. Also,
what was it, what did
it's,
you say it was?
it was just over 20 billion.
Oh, 20. Okay, not 200. Okay,
But
20.
let's remember that's on
Yeah.
top of record bloat in the government
Yeah.
sector, right? So it's a double whammy, and it's like, well, why did you hire, you know, thousands more people if you're still needing consulting done, essentially to do their job, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Sorry I said 200.
That's okay.
But I remember thinking 20 billion is a lot of money to begin with. And so yeah, how do we fix it? Well, we need a new government that's not going to
Yeah,
be functioning the way it
we
is.
just need to change that the government spends money only on fundamental important services to Canadians, right? Like right now, we're virtue signal on for everything, right? Like
Mhm.
we've, you know, We fund
We
abortion
spend it on
clinics in the
tampons.
Middle East, like a whole bunch of different ideological things in Africa, send money to Afghanistan because the Taliban needs it apparently. So we're spending money left, right, and center. It has nothing to do with Canada,
Yeah,
nothing to do with providing for Canadians. So we need to rein that in and start making that money work for Canadians, but even more importantly, stop taking that money away from Canadians.
yeah, yeah. We need a Miley. What's is it Miley?
Yeah, the
From our
Argentinian.
where he goes to the board, he's like, "We're done this, we done that." I don't know if you saw that video where he
That's
basically
so
did,
good.
but they're thriving right now in Argentina. Like they're
Yeah,
doing so good. And they have this is the first time in I don't know how long they said they have an economic surplus.
exactly.
And I and I know people will say, "Oh, it's too drastic. It's too drastic." I think we're at a point in time we're going to need something like that or we will
Well, no,
become a
we
third world.
100% need to. That
Yeah.
it's absolutely
Yeah.
critical. It's
Yeah.
absolutely critical because it's out of control. And just look at our deficits, right? Like Canada right now has no plan at all to return to a balanced budget.
Mhm.
Like there is nothing in the liberal current business plans to return Canada into next until past 2030. It would to balance budget. Like there is zero plan to it. But at that point, we're going to be spending over $80 billion a year just on our interest carrying costs. So
Wow.
we're going to be spending more money on our debt and the accumulation of it than we do on services. So that's why I always say if Canadians want better services, then they want a government that spends less because we're
Yeah.
spending that money, but we're going to be spending in other things. So
Mhm.
we can have incredible services because just get taxed so much, and we do produce a lot of revenue because of it within our corporations as well. It's just that we're spending it on everything else that has nothing to do with providing fundamental services to
Mhm.
us. So we absolutely need those drastic changes and talk about what Pierre, the conservatives, should be doing. So the risk for a lot of those changes is that they need an economic cycle to work through. So that means if the conservatives want to get reelected, they have to act fast because there
Mhm.
is a whole bunch of economic pain that will come through that needs to cycle through the economy before we come out on the other end of it and work properly again. So the conservatives, if they get into government, they don't have a honeymoon. They have to act on day one, just like Trump
Mhm.
is. We don't have executive orders in Canada, so we just have to again go back through a whole bunch of BS of a system to get anything done. But they have to shove things through to make changes drastically, like in the first couple of months, because the Canadian economic cycle has to work through all of that. We need to start mass deporting people within the first day. We need to start, enforcing our laws in the first day, and we need to start cutting a whole bunch of spending and government budgets out in the first day, kind of like Trump did with DEI and freezing hiring
Mhm.
into US. Like that, those are zero value departments, right?
Mhm.
For taxpayers.
Mhm. We have a lot of zero value department. Like
Mm-hmm.
even most of the job creation in the last few years have been within government. So they say, oh, these many jobs created, but most of them are government and they're outpacing the private sector. That's not sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, so what do you have any other subject you'd want to talk about, like final words on things that we should be focusing on, things we should be doing, and things we should be lobbying our government for?
I think we covered it all. I just think
Yeah.
the core aspect of things is aggressive action in the short term and
Mhm.
an incredibly important and robust planning for the long term. So we need a combination of the two of them. We just can't ignore one for the other, or and etc.
Mhm.
We just need action on all fronts, like Canada has never done, and do it unapologetically.
Just basically like Trump and Miley and some of what's the other one in, is it not Venezuela, but there's a guy, uh he's Christian. Do you know who I'm talking about? He's in
I,
one of the
I talk
countries.
is in South. Oh, in El Salvador.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah,
What's
yeah.
his name? I can't
Um,
remember.
yeah, I'm I'm
Like
blanking on his name right now. Yeah,
he did the same thing and turned his country around like in matter
yeah.
of an election, but do you think conservatives can have the backbone to do that?
That is what they need to sell Canadians. That's the way they've been acting so far has not been really promising. To be honest, but they really need to change that. They need to really change that thinking or their the way they're perceived within Canada and the global community. Because
Mhm.
one of the incredible things that, um, like the people in Argentina, El Salvador, and Trump, and what they got is huge uh, global, I guess, uh, outlook and huge
Mhm.
global eyes on them that said, okay, you're doing things, you're moving things around, let's do business. We need to create that kind of messaging to the world as well to say um, we are going to be open for business and we're going to be doing things so drastically because we want Canada will have businesses and investors waiting to knock on our door. We
Mhm.
just want to tell them that the door will be open for you to do that, and we're not going to be red taping with 5,000, bazillion different bills on the
Mhm.
way to do it. You can come to Canada, do business, obviously do it to the best environmental decisions, and get rocking. There'll be nothing else standing in your way.
Mhm. And I don't think politicians are the only one who can spread that message. I think they only go so far, but I think it's important that people who have platforms like myself and some of the other commentators, I mean, we don't have a lot in Canada. The US has a lot more to push this message out, and I think
Mhm.
that's one of the the downfalls that we have in Canada. The public can be so misled and brainwashed because there's not a lot of alternative. So maybe that should be a focus as well for the conservatives
Yeah,
if
that's
they
what I'm
want to.
saying. The
Yeah.
messaging can be as centralized as it is under Pierre right now.
Yeah.
Obviously, to promote his status, it needs to be like every single current MP, every single potential party member needs to be yelling inside their community, and they should be
Mhm.
funding them with for communication dollars because those two people on the can get the message into the ground floor
Mhm.
uh, rather than and do it proactively rather than hope that someone will log into Twitter or someone will log into
Yeah.
Facebook to see it, right? So those two people that can do it proactively. So the messaging need to be a lot more aggressive and empower the politicians to speak more freely and get that communication to their ground floor, to their communities, because that's essentially who's going to be voting at the end of the day.
That's true. Like it's we talk about social media and stuff, but they have direct access right on the ground if they do mail outs and things like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, so much to do. It's
Mm.
hard not to get discouraged when you see, but I have a bit of hope and encouragement seeing all the change that's happening in the US. And I think that's going to trickle when you start seeing all those countries that have started going in the same direction we're talking about. They have massive successes. So I think that that in itself will influence like all the ones that were going in the direction of socialism, wokeism, they're all struggling. They're
Yeah.
all not doing well.
And
And then
it's so exciting to see Trump just come in and kick the door shut and move on from it. Don't even think twice about it, right? It's just so irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, right?
yeah.
And and I'm so excited for Canada's future because of the amount of things we can do, and because because our population is relatively small. But we just need to
Mhm.
see that aggressiveness done. But we also need to see our provincial leaders start
Oh,
doing
yeah.
both things within their own provinces. Like we don't need to wait for Pierre or for a future government. We need to see our current provincial and premiers do bold, really cool stuff, futuristic stuff within the provinces because they have the power as well to do that.
Mhm. Mhm. That's true, and that's one of the things that we've kinda talked about where we haven't really seen that, especially not in Saskatchewan from Scott Moe, and they're always so afraid. Same with Doug Ford. Like, he
Yeah.
calls him a conservative, and some of the stuff I'm like, "You're right out of the Liberals' playbook." And,
It's hard to call any Canadian premier conservative. Really, they're just not liberal, right? Essentially,
yeah.
or they're just not NDP, which is why essentially a lot of them get voted. But we just can do so much stuff. Like and it's just I don't know how they don't get inspired just thinking about what future they can build for themselves and
Mhm.
for the citizens. Like, and this problem, the big difference between, I would say, NDP and liberals and conservatives, the NDP and liberals would just do things. They just go out
Mhm.
and do things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean they're good or smart, but they just go out and do
They
things.
just do it.
But the conservatives don't, right? And that's the problem. The conservatives are just too afraid to do anything because they don't want to, uh, you know, look boast, look like they're boasting or look like they're
Mhm.
investing in stuff because other conservatives will say, "Oh, the government should be investing in things." No, no, the government should be investing in a lot of things, just the right things, right? So they're afraid of this outlook, and then this argument they'll enter with the to other parties. But the issue is for conservatives, the way they can secure governments and wins in Canada is by providing people with a better life, and
Mhm.
that's essentially what they do. Because the reason NDPs and liberals win, just besides our more left society, is that they do things that impact people's lives, right?
Mhm.
Like they put money, for example, even just the carbon tax rebate, as
Mhm.
dumb as it is, people see a paycheck, see a check in the mail, and they're like,
They
oh,
buy their votes.
they buy the votes. Yeah, the conservatives can send people checks in the mail as well, just from good economics. But we don't develop. The conservative doesn't develop things aggressively, and that is one of the biggest issues, really, for the conservative side. They just don't
Mhm.
do things.
Mhm. It's true, it's true. I think they're too afraid of the media attack. Like, I do wanna blame the media a bit on this
Yeah.
because, like, if you look at the fact is almost anytime a conservative moves, they get attacked by the media. Every time a liberal moves, the media paints, "Oh, how great it is," and
Mhm.
because there's not really much counter to that, I don't think we had the problem what we have now 30, 40 years ago as much. I think this is very much a now problem.
Mhm.
Maybe once they pull that funding from the media, we'll start seeing a bit of a
But also,
change, but
just don't care for it. It's irrelevant
yeah.
whether
Is there yeah, I don't
it,
care. I
what
still say what I
CBC
think.
writes, exactly what CBC writes is
Yeah.
irrelevant. What any of those, what any of this their little commentators think, it's irrelevant. Nobody gives a shit, right? You know, there's a couple thousand people that watch the show. There's 40 some million people that don't, right? So
Mhm,
what CBC and all those people say and all whatever, who cares? Just go out and
mhm,
be bold and get things done. Because at the end of the day, if you can make Canadians more prosper, put more money into their pocket, put them in a better position, that's what's going to make you win, right? All
mhm,
those little, uh, bias commentator from the other side is just so irrelevant. Just go out and do
mhm,
things. And that's one of the strengths that the Liberal Party has over conservatives in general. They can be complete screw ups, which they have been, and no one blinks, right?
mhm,
They just still like power through it. They don't really care to what anyone else says as a party. Whereas into conservative party, onto conservative side, there's just so much infighting. And if
mhm.
someone hiccups even a little bit, they'll probably get thrown out of the party or whatever, right?
That's true.
And it doesn't happen in the liberals on the left side. They just don't care and they just keep moving forward. And within a couple of weeks, nobody remembers essentially. And or has the same value of care for it. But on the conservative side, a hiccup and the party falls apart, right? There's so much
Mhm.
infighting, yada yada yada. So we need to move from that and become more brave as a party, and more imaginative, more bold, more innovative, and just get things
Mhm.
done.
Mhm. I agree. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was actually a really good discussion. I think if you're
Pleasure.
willing to come on again, we can discuss like if there's big things that are happening. I know you're pretty busy, but
100%.
but again,
Anytime.
yeah, thank you so much. I love having these discussions because it gets you to think. And I just realized we didn't really get into much of the comments, but um I'll just read one really quickly because I thought it was interesting. The commentator said, I don't know the name because it's not a name, just a bunch of letters. Our supply chain needs reform. When a machine that costs 12,000 US dollars costs 14K in Alberta, and in Manitoba it's 30K for the same thing, and you're not allowed to buy it, period, from Alberta suppliers. I see this a lot. So I think they're probably talking about like that provincial red tape too
Yeah,
that's
that's what we
happening.
talked about, the
Yeah,
interprovincial red
yeah.
tape, which is just so insane. It
Yeah,
makes no sense.
yeah, yeah. So, but anyways, I just realized I never got to the comments. But yeah, if you want to come back on anytime, let me know. And especially if there's like big economic news, big innovation news and stuff, I think you're really a lot more informed than I am on the
Uh,
subject. But thank you so much.
it was a
And
pleasure.
I'm gonna pop you down, and then I'll just do the final closing of the show. But I'll reach out to you later.
Sounds good. Thanks,
Okay.
Nadine.
Thanks so much,
See
Kirk.
ya.
Okay. See ya. Wow, so that was a lot of information, a lot of really good discussion, a lot of things that I didn't even know was happening in Canada. I didn't know anything about quantum computing. I didn't even know that was a thing. And apparently it's something to be really excited about. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us on the show. If you want to hear more information like this, if you want to get more informed on what is happening in Canada, what is happening in the news, also sharing the tea on some of this stuff. I have another guest tomorrow, so I won't be doing like the regular update you on the news show later that I did kind of like yesterday because I have a guest tomorrow. So, but I will be doing a show Monday, and I'm going to let you know next week. There will only be a show Monday because I am going to Calgary for a conference Tuesday to Friday. I come back Friday. I might do a show on Friday depending what time I come, but it won't be at the regular time. And I might post some content of some of the people that I'm going to meet at this conference. So there's going to be a lot of really interesting people there. And but yeah, if you're not following or subscribed yet, follow and subscribe. You can find me on X, on Facebook, Rumble, and YouTube. And I also have Instagram and TikTok, not yet live streaming there, but I will be posting content there. And you can find me by searching Nadine G Ness. Nadine G is in golf Ness. And yeah, so I'll be back tomorrow with tomorrow is Sheldon Substack. It's not his last name. It's a different last name that I can never pronounce. But I know him as Sheldon Substack. So he is running for city council in Calgary. So we're probably going to discuss that a little bit and discuss a lot of other content. I don't know yet what we're going to be talking about. We'll find out when I talk to him later today to kind of game plan for tomorrow. But yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow at 12. Thanks.